Redesigning design. So is it time to do so? Let's have a chat about it. So a big hello, everybody. My name is Brian. I am the founder and design director at Design Surgeon. I want to extend a big virtual hello to everyone because, I'm not there today. And also to my good friends in Taiwan, ni hao. Before we talk about the topic today, redesigning design, let me share a little bit about who we are and a background to give you an idea of the context of this discussion. So my company, Design Surgeon, we're a design-led innovation consultancy that's passionate in making people's lives better. The catalyst of our innovation is people. That's the core of, the center of everything that we do. And we love working with organizations that also, have similar values to us and are deeply interested to improve their customers' lives. And we hope to be the ones to help them to do so. My team, we currently have 8 people, 8 core team members, and we have +5 consultants, specialists, contractors, etc. that we work with. To date, we've been operations for 11 years, and we've clocked about 300 plus projects. So these days, we work with many different types of clients in both the private and public sector. So working with large multinational companies, small to medium enterprises, government organizations, and even non-profits. Even though my background is in industrial design, these days, I do very little of it, to be honest. Let me share a couple of examples of the type of work that we do today. Just a few months ago, we worked on a rebranding project, but it's not a rebranding of a company, but actually a rebranding of an entire precinct, right? Which is a location in Singapore. So this is the Marina Center precinct. And here we work with a number of shopping malls. So these are 5 different properties, including the Esplanade, which is a concert theater in Singapore. And these are, if you've been to Singapore, you'll be familiar with these shopping malls. And what we were tasked to do was to conduct some design research. And here we included focus groups with the stakeholder groups, so these 5 properties, as well as intercepting 80 plus people right on the ground, trying to find out their perceptions of the location. Why did they come there? What makes it interesting to them? With that, then we employed and used design thinking methods to develop a series of design principles that eventually led to design of a brand strategy, right? And then here we worked and collaborated with some branding partners, and then we handed off the insights and findings to them, which they then developed a new branding proposition for them. More recently, we are working on a little bit more kind of off the beaten track project, but it's equally very important. So we work with the National Council of Social Services in Singapore, and here we use design thinking to lead the digital transformation of the social services sector here, right? So social services are places like welfare homes, voluntary children's homes, homes for the destitutes, right? We are working with on 83 projects, so it's an extremely large project that we're working on with a number of social service agencies and organizations. And the things that we do include technology audits, needs assessments, design research, and then importantly, innovation change management. And it's something that we're working on to 2023. So in a nutshell, even though my background is in industrial design, these days, we don't really focus on any industry or any design discipline, right? So we don't tell our clients that we do ID or we do graphic design or branding, etc. We don't. But what we actually focus on is a process, right? A process of design. If you're interested to know a little bit more about who we are or my company, please come to designsurgeon.com. Come say hi. Let me know if you like this speech or not, or you like this talk. I'm also available on all the other socials at designsurgeon.com. Okay, so what I'll share today is the fruits of a longitudinal study on the changing role of design. So this is something that started probably in 2011. So when I started my company, we started to think about how design thinking could be applied, right? And I was engaged to develop the Design Thinking and Innovation Academy's curriculum for the manufacturing sector in Singapore. So I know manufacturing is really big here in Taiwan. It's also the same thing in Singapore. Then after that, in 2014, thank you to my good friends at Chien University, I was invited to run two workshops with their students, and this was to explore the boundaries of beyond design. So what happens beyond a typical exploration of what design is all about, right? So looking across multidisciplines, and also looking at the boundaries of entrepreneurship, designing new systems and processes. Again, run back to Chien again for second round, and this time we explored the idea of creating synergies between design and business. And here we looked at designing the interface between business and design. And more recently, with the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts here in Singapore, where we developed the second year service design curriculum with a focus on the practice of design. So what I observed was that we constantly redesign the world around us, right, with our design capabilities, but we don't seem to spend enough time actually redesigning design. And the reason why I think this is something that we should address or constantly look at is, well, very simply because the problems we're looking to solve are getting harder and more complex, right? I'm sure many of you who are in the design industry are actually realizing it, right? The work that you do, it's not same. It's getting harder almost every single time. But not only that, right? There are a lot of external factors, right? I mean, as you all know, and probably the reason why I'm not giving this presentation live, right? It's because of COVID, right? And COVID is really the biggest disruptor, right? It's a world of change and disruption thanks to COVID. But also, if we look in the textbooks of economics, we also realize that the nature of capitalism, right, is actually creative destruction. And I really like this quote by Schumpeter, right? So the nature of the evolution and growth of organizations, right, and businesses, you start to realize then, what here Mark Zuckerberg, right, the founder of Facebook, what he wrote a letter to the Exchange Commission, US Securities and Exchange Commission in 2012, and basically said the riskiest thing is to take no risk. And I think that's really the key. Companies are realizing that they have to do something, and if they don't do anything, they are going to die or they're going to disappear, right? With the changes of COVID, changes of the world around them, and then just the natural ebbs and flows of the life of an organization. But that said, if you do decide to take risks, and many organizations that we work with, they actually realize this, that innovation or new ideas is risky. Okay, so a lot of ideas failed, right? And I think a study that was done measured that 95%, right, of consumer products, 30,000, right, 95% of 30,000 new consumer products launched this year fail, right? So it's not easy. But that said, in perhaps around the period of like 2015, 2016, the D&I Management Institute, they've been quietly measuring the performance of what they call design-centric companies, right? These are companies who proclaim that design is really the core of their business or core of what they do. All right, and these are companies that I'm sure all of you will be familiar with, including Apple, Coca-Cola, Herman Miller, Ford, right, Nike, P&G, Starbucks, et cetera, et cetera. And they track their performance in comparison to the S&P 500, right, for a period of 10 years from 05 to 2015. And you can see that they've outperformed these companies, right, as a whole, outperformed the S&P 500 by over 200%. So Design Management Institute, they concluded that design is a very important factor. And this is maybe a secret, right, that these companies, they figured out and have applied that to the, and realized the value of design in the performance of their companies. McKinsey also did a study, right? And they said that basically companies who are in the top quartile of the design index, they outperform the industry, right, as much as 2 to 1. So revenues, right, huge, right, 10% increase, even returns to shareholders. And this is something that many people who run businesses are always concerned with, right? How do we give back, or how do we keep our shareholders happy? And a lot of these companies, they're starting to realize that design is a central part of this equation. But this is nothing new, In 1975, Thomas Watson Jr., right? So he's, I think, the grandson, if I'm not wrong, the founder of IBM, right? He famously said, "Good design is good business," right? So in the previous slides, when I shared these companies, they get it, right? It's almost as if, the enlightened companies recognize it and they realize it. But there's a little bit of a twist to this story, because everybody gets it, right? In today's context, right? The world has figured out design has a tangible value. Everybody does good design. Okay, so everybody figured it out already, right? Today itself, right? As Kevin McCullough mentioned, today design itself provides no competitive advantage. Only great design does that. And this was in 2010, guys, right? 10 years ago or 11 years ago. And now, 10, 11 years later, this problem, it continues to persist, right? Because really, I like to tell everybody and the students that I work with that design is a commodity, right? Consumers are overserved by many brands. Okay, so what does it mean, right? What does design as a commodity mean? First off, consumers are overserved by many brands. So brands, they trip over themselves, right, to give their very best to the consumers. To that, they do anything and everything that they can to keep the consumers with them. Consumers have many options and solutions of equal quality. Now, this also spans across domains, right? If I am bored on the weekend, what can I do? There are many, many options, from watching a movie to riding my battery-powered skateboard to, playing games, online games, etc. So many, many well-designed products, solutions, services, across multiple different domains, and all of them, delivering great quality. And thanks to Apple, I think, and that's why I have this little Apple logo in the background of the slide, is that because of the work that they've done a great service, right? Well, I would say it's a service. Some might say a disservice, but it's a great service to the design industry, right? Because it allowed people to understand what, when something is a good design or not, right? So therefore, there is a mature understanding. I mean, consumers may not be able to describe what a good design is, but they can tell when a design is good or not, right? So that makes it even harder. And then these days with the internet, the cost to buy design is falling, right? So I think our graphic designer, communication designer friends are struggling with this introduction of these $5 logos, right? That people can just go out and buy a so-called brand, right, with very little money. So, it's looking a little bit bleak, right? And so I think one of the key things that I think to answer this question, it's all part of this larger discussion that we're having on redesigning design, is this understanding of, well, so what is design superpower? Right? I want to pose this question to all of you and keep it in the back of your mind. And I think that's something that we need to be very clear of what we have, right? What we're doing. And we'll come back to this to the end. But keep this question in your mind, and then think about it, as we go. To help you kind of have that tip, this is a quote written by David Lower many years ago, and it's always fascinated me, right? And this is really kind of the longitudinal study that I did to really kind of uncover this question of what is design superpower. And it starts off by this very simple statement: design is essentially the opposite of chance. Okay, so I looked at it and go like, okay, so what exactly does it mean, right? And this is also something that has been stewing, if you'd like, at the back of my mind. If you look at and Google design process, okay, and of course, there's also this idea of the design thinking process, you would get 3 billion or so, 3.5 billion results. Again, and you would also notice that I do talk about design and design thinking quite interchangeably, right? In this discussion today. So if you do that, you find that there are tons and tons of design processes, and I love it. It was a hobby of mine, just going around collecting them, right? This is one of the first iteration of the D School's design thinking process, which they published, or famously published. Very nice, very clean one by the Duffy group, right? And they basically said design is as much of a process as it is an end product, but the process should be simple, very simple, right? A legend who recently has passed, Bill Mogridge, right? So he, in his book Designing Interactions, spoke about a very interesting, design process. This is also one of my favorites from Walt Disney. As you can see, the process of design is also fairly, convoluted. And I think, after a while looking at all the design processes and all of us designers looking at ways to create infographics, right, to show exactly what we do, I think this pretty much, right, the famous one, right, Damon Newman, the squiggle. We start by kind of going round and round and round and round and round, and it's this mess, and eventually come to a point. So at Design Sojourn, we also play this game, right? So we create our own little process. We call it the orbital process, right? We start by looking at the vision, okay, and then we go through this kind of a circular activity. So that's why there's no accident that our process is actually circular. So we look at discover, define, and design, and then eventually coming to deliver, right? Where discover is about understanding humans through observation and research, defining the challenges, etc., where we want to go, and of course, designing the process. Right. So we almost, we move very much like this spiral, right? So we borrowed this from the agile, if you like, development process. Very much is actually quite similar. But as I kind of traveled and learned a bit more, ran a number of workshops about this, I started to kind of think about, well, what is the pattern here? Why are there so many different design processes? And I think this little infographic that I found pretty much actually explains it, that the reality of it is that all design processes are the same, right? If you can see here, going from the dark blues all the way, or the dark blue greens all the way to the green, you start to realize that the reality of it is that they're all very similar, right? Incidentally, I used to work at Fitch, so my process is, following the 4D process from Fitch, right? So or comes from there. So the reality of it is that all processes are different. Sorry, all well, they call it not different but same, right? Same but different. So if you analyze it and look at the different patterns, you start to realize that, in the process of design, there are three value pillars. Okay. And these are, very simply, if you forget whatever I said today, the three key things are: number one, right? Design process is about humans. Number two, it's about iteration, right? Brainstorming, iterating ideas, and then importantly, validation. So when we started to realize that, essentially it's the same and we're kind of all doing the same thing, then exactly what is it that we're doing? And that sort of, as we started to unpick the onion or peel back the layers of the onion, if you'd like, even in the own design, in our own design activity. And we like to do that with our clients, right? We unpick and then peel back the layers of the onions with our clients. We should also look at it with design. So maybe let's start with the kind of the key one, which is humans. So borrow a idea from psychology, right? Which is, we call it a mental filter, right? So people look at life through this thing called a mental filter. And basically, it's very much like wearing a pair of sunglasses, or this saying of, looking at the world through rose-tinted lenses, right? So, if you say, for example, are having a tough life, you're jobless, looking for work, you're having some, chronic illness, you tend to be like the lens on the left here, as you see, which is a bit more dark, right? You a bit more negative. But if you are, happy life, happy family, very feeling comfortable, peachy, right? You tend to look at the world more optimistic, right? In a brighter way. Now, if you take this idea of lens and how, people look at things, you start to realize that design, it really operates in a very simple framework, right? So you have a lens. On one hand, you have a business and an organization, and they look out at the world through a lens, their lens, right? And then you have your customers and users, they're looking back at the business or looking back at the brand or the organization through their own set of lenses. And in most cases, right, the challenges that designers are asked to solve is because these two arrows are not aligned. So indeed, then if we're talking about, well, what does design do? Design essentially, right, manipulates the perception lens between how an organization looks at a customer and vice versa. That's all it is. Okay, if you start to think about design, it's interesting that this conference is actually called The Lens, and actually it is, a very powerful analogy or method that we use here. You start to realize that actually you can do a lot more. But when you start to look at, well, what is this lens and how you can manipulate it, right? What exactly, again, as we peel back the layers of the onion, are you looking for? So if we understand what and how people are looking at through their lens, we'll give you a very simple example, right? So here you have a cup of coffee, right? And you're kind of thinking, well, what is this coffee? But the reality is people don't want a coffee, right? They want to meet others regularly, right? So here is a coffee shop in Hanoi, Vietnam, and this coffee shop actually does exist because one of my colleagues, went on a holiday there, and she sent us a cheeky little picture of her, like saying, "Hey, I'm here." But if you see in this coffee shop in Vietnam, you start to realize that, well, if I'm the owner of this coffee shop, like, what is the role that I play for my customers? Okay, so much so that they would be happy to sit on such uncomfortable seats, right? And maybe consider the type of coffee that they'll drink. You realize that actually, this cafe is actually outside a church, and people, in Vietnam, they, may not live in the city. They may live in the outskirts or in the farms around, around the city. And once a week, they'll come to to the church for the church service on the mass, right? And then after that, they go meet their friends, right? So then you start to realize that they're not really there for the coffee, but they're actually there for the friendship. Professor Clayton Christensen, the late Professor Christensen, he said that, this is that the consumer has a different view of the marketplace. He simply has a job to be done and is seeking to hire the best product and service to do it. So the reality of it is that when we start to look at how the lens of how the customers, what these lenses are and how the customers look at us through their lens, we must start to understand what this person's job to be done, right? Because when we know what their jobs to be done or their needs are, we can design meaningful experiences and solutions to fulfill these needs. I'm sure some of you would have experienced going through this whole design process, coming up with a wonderful design solution, then realizing that, oh, actually, it's great, the customers like it, but they just don't buy it. Perhaps the reason is that it doesn't actually quite fulfill their jobs to be done. Another way you can look at it, it's about really managing expectations, right? So both have comfort, right? In this case here, you want to go from A to B, and I said I want to do it in a comfortable way. You have, either a Rolls Royce on the right, or you have, a simple Volkswagen on the left. So the reality of it is, people don't say what they do or what they say, right? So people are like icebergs, not so much like onions, but people are like icebergs, right? So what you really see is on the top, but what we want to understand is this deep thing that's happening there, right? So indeed, people don't do what they say or say what they do, and that's why they have this. I took a picture of this in a public toilet. This is very funny. I thought I had a good laugh, right? Nobody will probably admit to doing this, but somehow if the footprints that you see, right, people do it, and therefore you need to have a sign. So when you start to kind of then analyze it, and what this design world is all about, you start to realize that the world of design is split into two camps, right? You have design as a creator and design as an enabler, right? So on one hand, you have, when design as a creator is design as an implementation activity, and then on the other hand, you have design as a strategic activity. So how does that actually then work, right? So I wanted to share this idea of a hermeneutic circle. Okay, so something that a good friend of mine, Maurice McGinley, he shared this idea with me called the humanetic circle. And what is humanetics, right? So humanetics is basically a formal study of how we make sense of reality, right? It's a process moving between abstract models and concrete evidence in order to grasp the real meaning of a situation. Okay, so they use this idea of a map and a territory to describe humanetics, right? Hermeneutics, sorry. So a map, as you all know, are abstract. They sacrifice detail to look at relationships. And territory is concrete, where choices happen. The map gives us direction. The territory gives us traction. So we follow maps and we respond to territories. Okay, so we make sense of the world by continuing reorientating one to the other in this hermeneutic circle, right? So it doesn't matter where you start with the abstract or concrete. The important thing is the iterative movement between them, right? Neither map nor territory makes much sense without the other. So let me share a little bit more, right? So you have the idea of a map, right, to orientate yourself, okay, in the territory, and then the territory is on the ground, right? What you see, and you orientate the ground to the map, right? And as you set off, you kind of compare the map, the territory, and back and forth, right, to understand the reality of your situation, right? So this back and forth movement between map and territory is called the hermeneutic circle. Okay, so if you anchor that and put this into design, you start to realize that the map, right, the theory, right, so map is basically the theory and theorizing, and the territory is basically practice, right? So the map phase of the cycle gives context and a direction to the territory. Okay, it doesn't matter where you start from, the abstract or concrete. Okay, the important thing is the iterative movement between them. Okay, so if you look at it in a bit more detail, so what's concrete, right? The territory, things are like belief, objects, tactics, reality, doing, right? Execution. And then in the abstract map part of things, you're looking at things like reason, strategy, relationships, right? Thinking, algorithm. And if we look back at this idea of the world of design, right? Split between these, design as a creator, right? Design is an implementation activity, and design as an enabler, right? Design is a strategic activity. You're kind of moving back and forth between these two. Okay, so the design as a creator is in a way, it is the territory, and design is a strategic activity, is very much like the map, right? So you're kind of moving them back and forth. So then if we kind of go backwards a little bit and we talk about this thing we call, design thinking. And if you just do design thinking, it's essentially just really focusing on the map, okay, you have no territory, and therefore it becomes pointless. Okay. If you are doing design doing, or just doing, just design doing, right, then it becomes, there's no map, then it just becomes aimless, right? So if you're just creating the next pair of speakers, the next thing or the next object, but there's no larger direction, it becomes just an aimless activity. Now, one of the key kind of pro tips that I want to give all of you is that in design, the map is a jigsaw puzzle. Okay, so that's really the key. And to really clean up what this map is about, you really have to focus on a very iterative process. So being on the ground, looking back at the map, and as you kind of uncover the map, as you go. Now, so we talked a little bit about then the strategy and kind of where design is placed. Now let's take a look a bit about the territory activities. And here, I wanted to share, a video that we did, and I won't go into a lot of detail. So this is called The Powers of 10, and this was done in 1977. So in many ways, what I'm sharing with all of you today isn't something that is, done or new. It's been around for a long time. Yeah, I won't go into so much detail, but basically what it does is it's about many ways of seeing. You can find this video on YouTube, right? It starts with a couple, having a picnic, and then they move up and away, going all the way up into space, and then coming around, right, all the way out, and then going backwards, right, where they then come back all the way to the man, and then they go kind of deeper and deeper, right? So if we understand this whole idea of the powers of 10, we start to recognize it's actually really about the perspectives of design. The thing that many customers, or my customers, or people and organizations, they get confused with design is because we have so many different ways of expressing it. Okay, but so in here, when we talk about the perspectives of design, okay, let's say we want to explore urban mobility, and we understand how it's the context of it, right? So if we are talking about it close to the hand, to the human, about 1 meter, you're talking about an automobile. Okay, so then if you are looking at it a little bit more between individuals, you talk about the types of vehicles, and as you move your perspective higher, you maybe talk about neighborhood dynamics, eventually urban density, and then if you look at the highest level around the planet, you're talking about designing for carbon emissions and tax policies. And we can actually to help better communicate with our non-designers and organizations what these roles of designs are. And we're all talking about product design, right? So product design could be industrial design, or it could be products which are digital products, right? So it gets super confusing. But if you start to then communicate the fact that we are actually designing for a certain level of context, you start to realize that maybe UI, UX, product design, graphics, right, they're all kind of closer to the user. And then if you start to take a step back and move further up, service design, process design, branding, business models, spatial, eventually into policy making, right? So that's kind of moving that up. Okay. So then what, let's go back to our question, right? So what is design superpower, right? So how, did any of you figure it out? Okay. So design superpower is really, if you encompass all of that thinking together, you realize that design, is able to set the direction by visualizing the future, right? That's the first thing that we can do. Secondly, design has a consistent process that can deliver results. Thirdly, design can be used to create solutions that will be desired by consumers. So there's a lot of future looking, forward looking, moving forward. But, we established very early on in our discussion that, moving forward, change, disruption is all risky. So if you think about that and you kind of pair it together and on what the superpower of design is, really is design is all about risk management. It's not so much about creating the next new thing, but it's about managing the risk that things, people, organizations take when they start to take a new step in a new direction. Now, if we look at what risk is, and I'm not an expert, so I went to ask Wikipedia. You can see here I've underlined, risk is a loss of something of value, right? So that's the fear, right? If I go into a new direction, my company crashes, right? I lose my customer base or I run out of business, right? That's the worry. But risk is also defined as an intentional interaction with uncertainty, right? And that's something that design as a process and a capability is very good at. Okay, so we talked about design superpower, right? Which is risk management. So what is a designer's superpower? Okay, so from our discussion, designers have the ability to create something from nothing, right? Designers have the skill, processes, and talent to do so repeatedly, and this makes people uncomfortable, right? So I mean, how many of you in your career, someone will come to you and say, I don't know what you do, but wow, it is amazing what you do, right? Or you have a hard time kind of explaining, what exactly that you do, right? So now some people who know you and love you might think, wow, this is great, you're doing fantastic stuff. But in general, most people, they're not comfortable, right? They're not comfortable with dealing with the ambiguity that comes with risk, the ambiguity of moving a company forward, right? But designers are comfortable with that. Okay. So when you start to realize that we and who we are and what we do, we recognize that it's really not so much about the end outcome, but all the work that we do really is to communicate to the non-designers who are uncomfortable with the future, through all these tools that you use, right? From personas, the journey maps, service blueprints, right? Experience storyboards. These are ways that we can communicate the future, give people the sense of comfort, right? And to explain to them and help them to be comfortable with this ambiguity, right? So my last slide here, you can help people figure out what to do next. Okay, that's really, I'll leave you guys with a call to action, right? Help people to figure out what you do. Use your skills, use the processes that you know, use the tools. But importantly, right, it's not about doing things right? But help them to do the right thing in the first place. Okay. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.